Okay, we're in the middle of Erev Shabbos. We're learning for Refuah Shalema for Miriam Rus Basara, B'Shir B'Suras Taivas, B'Karev. So in the middle of Sugya about touching Yayin Nesech, what exactly is the halacha, right? Mixed in, Isuri Ano, only Asa B'Shtia, different dargas, right? If it could be Asa B'Shtia Mutter B'Ana, it could be Asa B'Ana, and even fellas, after it's mixed in, it could be you could use the rest of the wine and just sell the Isuri Ano. In other words, let's say $100 worth of wine that was touched by a guy gets thrown into $500 or $600 of regular wine. So you just deduct 100 and sell it for the 600 or 500. So you're not having enough from it. There's a sheeter of Shum Gamliel who's going to see that seems to be the halachas like him that we can pass him like that. But we're, for all intents and purposes, we are on Nun Zayin Amid Beis, Nun Zayin Amid Beis, and we are there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up. Ahu Uvda the Havi ben Mechuza. There was a certain halacha lemaisa that took place in Mechuza. Asa Ovid Kechavim, Ayel Chanusa di Yisrael. He went into a store of a yid, and what did he want to do? He wanted to buy wine. Amalahu Islu Chamra Lezvuna. You have any wine to sell? So Amra Lei Loi. He says no. In other words, the Jew didn't want to get involved with this. He said, I don't have any wine to sell. Have a Yosef Chamra B'Davla. There was a bucket, and there was wine in the bucket. Shadi Beyade. The guy went ahead and mixed his hand in the bucket. Sheikh Bey. He shook it up. Amalahu Hailav Chamra. Who? This isn't Chamra. You tell me you have no wine. This isn't wine. So Shakle Heyech Beriske, the Jew got angry. He picked up the bucket of wine and Shadir Lidana, and he went ahead and he threw it. What? He threw it into his bucket, meaning the bigger bucket. So basically, the guy in his anger put himself in a really bad situation because now you're gonna have a shiloh on the whole big bucket, all the yayin that's in there, right? So how would you pass in the shiloh? So Sharia, Rava Lizvune Levet Kechavim, Rava permitted to sell it to what? To a guy. So in other words, it was Mutter Bahana. It was also B'Shtia, it was Mutter Bahana, and therefore you see that he held that this guy who went ahead and took his hand and messed around in there, he wasn't doing it l'shem avodas zarah. He wasn't doing l'shem avodas zarah. That wasn't his kavana. And Memela said Rava, since it wasn't his kavana to go ahead and make into avodah zarah, then therefore it would be permitted to sell. For shtia not, because the guy touched it, but to go ahead to asabana, he went asabana. Okay, so just one minute, let's go reiterate the case. We just began the case. A guy walked into a Jewish store. He asked if there's any wine to sell. The Jewish proprietor told him no. The guy sees a ladle or some kind of small bucket, puts his hand in it, shakes it around, and goes, and this isn't wine? And it was. The Jew got angry, took it, and he threw it in his barrel of wine. What's the din? Said Rava, you can go ahead and sell it. You can sell the wine. It's mashma, guys. You could sell everything. Guys, this is important. You could sell the whole barrel, everything. In other words, you wouldn't have to go ahead and even deduct the Avodah Zorah. So it's in other words, Rava held that it's asa b'shtia, but it's mutter behana. And extent that it's mutter behana, you could even go ahead and sell it, right? It could sell it, right? That's what Rava said. Okay, now, if ligoleha Rav Huna bar Chinina, Rav Huna bre the Rav Nachman, and Rav Huna bre the Chinina and Rav Huna the son of Rav Nachman, they both argued on him and said that what you can't sell it, that it's asa bahana, and you can't sell it. So nafik shipure de Rava. So the shofris, literally the shofris is shofar, but it means is the announcers. They would be machris. They would go and like a shofar goes ahead and announces. So announces the Rava v'shari. They said Rava said it's permitted. The nafik shipure de Rav Huna bar Chinina, Rav Huna Rav Nachman the asra, and they answered it. Fellas, the following sugya I'm doing is according to Rashi. There's a very, very long thesis over here. He argues vehemently with Rashi, predicated upon, fellas, that the following Gemara is out of order. The following Gemara is out of order. So Tosfos' big problem with Rashi is, why would the Gemara go out of order, as we're going to see. So now, again, the halacha is clearly, Rava held it's mutter b'hana, you could sell the whole kit and caboodle, you don't have to make any deduction whatsoever. Good. Ikla Rav Huna Breder Rav Nachman l'Mechuza. Now, who was the Rava Mechuza? It was Rava. Who showed up? His Bar Plukta, Rav Huna Breder Rav Nachman. Amle Rava l'Rav Eliakim. This is a very good trivia question. Shame. Who's the Shamash Rava? It's Rav Eliakim. Eliakim is the Shamash Rava. So now, why did Rava tell Rav Eliakim? Tarik Goli. Don't open the door. Leilesi Inshi the Nitzrach. Right? They shouldn't come to bother me. So this is another problem Tosfos has with Rashi. That why would Rava lock the door? Not, it's not to explain his position. It's mashma. So Rava, if you look at Rashi, guys, Ikra Rav Huna Breder of Nachman L'Chuza, La'achas man, Achas Shechozaboy. If the Rava already had changed his mind, Shechsi Rasay Abaya Al Yidei Tshuva Sheheshavloi. That Abaya changed Rava's mind that it should be Asibahana based upon the answer that Abaya gave. So here, guys, the Gemara, we didn't have the Gemara yet about Rashi. So you hear this Gemara should be after the Gemara with Abaya. So Rav Huna shows up, and Rava changed from Mutter Bahana to Asa Bahana. But now Rav Huna is showing up. Rav Huna is showing up, and at this point in time, Rava had changed his mind. Why did he change his mind? Because of the Gemara that we didn't see yet. That's because of the Gemara that we said Rava changed his mind. That's why Rashi had a problem. Tosfos had a problem with Rashi. So it's a long Tosfos. He had a totally different shot based on a different Gersois. We'll stay with Rashi for Daf Yomi purposes and also for clarity. It just makes it more, one. I'm happy if you get Rashi. Okay, so now it's very geschmack. So now he shows up, and Rava doesn't want to see him. Nonetheless, Oil Gabe Rav Huna Breder Nachman barged in. Amalei ki gavna mai. So he said, "What's the din if inadvertently a guy is meshach sheik yayin, not for the sake of Avodah Zorah, but for another reason? Is it mutter banav asabana?" So Amalei Rabbi told him asa afila behana, not only b'shtia, but it's asa behana. So all of a sudden, Rav Huna Breder of Nachman, he was geared for a fight. He was geared for a halachic dispute. He was going to fight with Rava. And Rava tells him, it's asibana, which is what Rav Huna, Rav Nachman paskin in the first place. Says Rav Huna, Rav Nachman to Rava, Marhu da'ama shich sheich ein oise yayin nesech. Even though he shook it, it's not yayin nesech, meaning it's mutter bahana, and you allowed him to sell it. So Rava answered, Eimer da'amri ana. When did I say you could sell it? Levar midemei da'hu chamra. Right. Aside from the value of that wine that was asabana, the mehud chamra mi amri, right? The value of that, did I go ahead and say? So in other words, really, guys, Rava had said you could sell the whole thing. After the next piece of Gemara, Rava had charata. Good. So it's asabana. If it's asabana, you can't sell it. Meaning, as my scenario, if there's $100 worth of shooken Gentile wine thrown into a bigger barrel, you can sell it chutz from that amount. In other words, we're not getting to the Shaila Bittel, and that's the Shaila we'll see later on, whether it's bottle or not, we'll see that later on, right? The Shaila Bittel. Okay, so now let's just see Rashi, guys. Rashi, Geshmak. Says Rashi, 3 lines down. Tarik Gali, Sogar Hadeles. So he told Rabbi Al Yakum, close the door. Shem Isyari Merav Huna. Rava was scared of Rav Huna. He should go ahead and ask some kashas. Which again, Tosfos has a problem. If he had kashas that were really viable, why would Rava be scared of that? In other words, you want to get to the truth halachically, in L'chemes HaTorah, why would he be scared? These are all questions that Tosfos is bothered with Rashi's pshat. So old Rav Huna legabe, Rav Huna came in. Rashi says,
what does shich mean?
Shake. So that's what he shook it up. So all Rav Huna legabe uboy mine ki hay gavna. Here you have it again. Nasin shich sheich ovid kechavim biyenish le Yisrael sheloy bekavanas nisach lavodas kechavim mai. That was the case, right? The guy wanted to buy wine. The proprietor told him no. He went ahead, took his hand, shook it around, and goes, "And what's this?" So he wasn't Mecham Avodah Zorah, but he did a physical action. Okay? Amalei. So Rava told him, Asa af bahana. And what does Rashi say, guys? Shechayzabai. Again, you have to see the nuances of this Gemara. He had charata. He said it's Asa bahana. So what did Rav Huna say to him? V'amarhu da Amar, you said it's mutter to sell. The kosherisa l'zvunei lo'ev tikechavim, you permitted to sell to a guy, so you see it's mutter bahana. Again, there never was a shiloh on shtia with drinking it, guys. The whole shiloh is what? Whether it is mutter bahana or asa bahana. So what did Rava say? The may hahu chamra the have bidavla mi amrinon, right? The worth of that amount of that was in the little bucket. Mi amrinon moedinim beid it sarich lahoylech damav, right? You moeded that what that you moeded that you have to go ahead what and sell it. Liyam melach have to throw it out. You can't that worth. In other words, you're going to sell that. You get that $100 worth of it. You're going to have to throw in the yam melach when you get the coins. Umishum ksufa k'amahachi, aval ihu kulashari. In other words, as kisufa, that's what he told him. But he initially held you could sell the whole thing. So he was embarrassed, which is again Taisus' problem. Why is he embarrassed? If this is what he held, this is what he held. This is all Taisus' problem with Rashi's pshat. So says Rashi, just to go through the sequence. In a second, we're going to see Abai is going to ask Rava, why did he say the wine that was mishachshech al yedei agoy shaloi l'shem avodah zara is still asa bahana, and Rava said it's muta bahana, you could sell it. Said Abaya it's asa bahana, and Abaya is going to get Rava to change his mind. Rav Huna shows up. Rav Huna Bar Nachman shows up, who had argued on Rava initially without asking questions on him. He argued initially. He shows up. Rava says, close the door. Didn't help. He came in, said the same question. If a guy shakes up, what's the halacha? And Rava said, he's surah bahana. Now, Rava really held it. Initially, you could sell the whole thing. It's mutta bahana. But now, because of the kisufa, why did he tell him? No, I never meant that you sell the whole thing. I meant you sell everything chutz ramat of the avodah zarah. Okay, that's what we're holding. Now, why did Rava change his mind? Ki asa lepumpadisa, right? This Maisa came to Pumpadisa. Rashi says, Hai Maisa havi mekame hach the ikla Rav Huna lemechusa. This Maisa that we're going to bring in now, guys, is before the start of Shir. Going back to the beginning of Shir, 8 lines up in the Amid Beis, guys. Why does it say 8 lines up in the Amid Beis? Hahu uvda the havi mechusa. There was a case in Mechuza where this was the guy went into the guy went into the Jewish shop. Good. This Maisa that Abaye is going to bring took place what before this. It took place before this. That's what he's telling you. He asked them all these questions. Umasnita the asa shmait. Umasnita the asa shmait. Nachmeni shmaita umasnisan. Rabbi Nachmeni, that's Abaya. That's some place that was his name. Some saying his name that was his father's name. Abaya stands for what, right? Asher b'cho Yeruchim Yosem. We saw in Daf Lamed Aleph Gittin Abaya Asher b'cho and you Yeruchim Yosem because he was a Yosem. Anyway, so Abaya asked him Shmaitza Sugya Umasnita and a Tanoic source the Asa that said where you have do an action that of avodah zarah without kavanah for avodah zarah, it's asa bahana. Shmaitza, where was the Shmaitza? Now, uvda the havi ben Ardoi. There was a case in Ardoi where again a guy went ahead and shook up shaloi l'shem avodah zarah without kavanah. Asa Shmuel asked it in Ardoi. B'Tferia, there was a mice in Tferia. V'yasa Rabbi Yochanan. So this is Shmaitza. These are Meroyim. They asked it. V'mila l'fi she'ena b'nei Torah. And Rav answered Abaya. You know the reason. They asked it not because it's really asa, but because the people in Nardoi and Tveria are not b'nei Torah. Therefore, there was a chumra ba'alma, but really it's muta. But because they're not b'nei Torah, and they may go ahead in a situation where the goy is mishachshrei l'shem avodah zarah, to avoid that scenario, they said well, it's asa, even though it was mishachshrei shaloi l'shem avodah zarah. Okay, now says Abaya to Rava. And Abaya said to Rava, Tzveria uvenardoi ain't a b'nei Torah, the mechuza b'nei Torah. In other words, if you're machmir there, you should be machmir over here. Why would you go ahead and matter it? So that's one problem that he had. Masnisan, where's the a Tosefta that also shows it's asa b'hana? Again, guys, what's the key? That with mishach sheikh shalei l'shem avodah Zorah is asa b'hana. The agardimin. This guy was in charge of measurements. He was given a job by the king to be in charge of measurements. He was, again, you want to make sure that Hin said that, Aphite said that. You want to make sure that. So this guy they go around and he makes sure. And he was a guy, and in his job, he would have to open barrels and go ahead and do different things. So what did he do? Rashi says, "Shekodach b'mei nekes v'hela." He went ahead. There was the bung in the barrel. He went ahead. He drilled into it. He stuck a straw into it, and he sucked up some wine. So the wine came up. That was an action of shich. Another shot, he let it go down, and the wine that touched his lips went back into it. Either way, there was problems over here. This machlekes was showing him exactly what the problem was. I just gave you two opinions. One, by putting it up, it's a shich. Two, by touching his mouth and going down, he touches the wine mamish, right? Or what happened was he tasted from a kais, and he threw it back in the barrel. Now this is a Tosefta, guys. This is a Tanoic statement, not an Amoraim statement. And they asked it. My love behana, not that they asked bahana, it was like b'shtia. B'shtia, it says Rava b'shtia. Notice it's mutter bahana. If it's mutter bahana, listening yimacher, they should say you can sell the whole barrel. Kidiktani sefer, like we learned in the sefer of the Mishnah. Choram by Vidikachovin. Rashi says Choram is a Meshugana. Look 3-4 lines to the bottom, guys. Chorim Meshuga. He's Meshuga. Ubal Merivais. And he fights. He's a Meshuga who likes to fight. And he acts without he's reactive. He doesn't pause before his actions. So there was a Choram by Vidikachovin. Shahosh Yodei Lechavius. He stuck his hand in a barrel. He thought it was oil. And he found out in truth to be wine. And they said over there you could sell. So in other words, you have it's a Tosefta. You have two cases. One case, the Agardamin, Mamish did an action of kavan in the wine. And the second action was in Shemen. In Shemen, it said Yimacher. What does Yimacher mean? You could sell it because it's mutter b'hana. So therefore, when it said above asruha, it couldn't have been that the acid b'shtia, but it's mutter b'hana, because if it's mutter b'hana, they would have used a consistent term that it's possible to sell it. Again, look at me. You have two terms. You have a brisa. You have one case with the gardamin, which is wine. A second case where this charam, this meshugana, he stuck his hand thinking it's shemen, it wasn't at all. So this case, guys, over here is much reason to go ahead and be maker. Why? Because he didn't know it was wine at all. Over here, he knew it was wine. Over here, he didn't know it was wine. So over here, it said puzzle. Over here, it said yimacher. Rabbi wanted a taina. When it said puzzle over here, it means to drink. But einachinami, it's mutter b'hana. What does yimacher mean? It means mutter b'hana. So said Rava, if you wanted to say in the same Tosefta, the mutter b'hana, you want to use the lashon of puzzle. You would use the lashon of yimacher. By the fact that you use the lashon puzzle, must be mat asamana completely. So this is the problem. This caused Rava to have charata. This conversation caused Rava to have charata. Okay. Anyway, so tiyufta the Rava tiyufta. The Gemara concludes that this is an upshlag on Rava. Tiyufta the Rava tiyufta. That Rava, what's the tiyufta? That if a goy does an action, shaloi l'shem avodah Zorah, but it's an act, he touches it, right? He moves it. Even though his kavanah wasn't Avodah Zorah, it's asa b'hana. It's asa b'hana. You can have enough from it, and therefore Rava said, Rava's changing. Rava initially said it's mutter b'hana. Therefore, you can sell the whole barrel. Rava changed and told Rav Huna, Rav Nachman, no. When I said mutter to sell, I mean chutz from that. Now, how do you avoid, guys? Just to reiterate, you're taking a part of Avodah Zorah and it's asa b'hana and it's falling into a vat. So we'll get into the Shaila of Bittul later on. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, just sell it chutz midemei yayin esach sheba. That's the Rav told Rav Nachman, just sell it. My scenario is worth 600, sell it for 500, and the $100 worth of yayin esach is going to be out the window. That's the sugya according to Rashi. Who gavra? There was this individual. Excuse me, I skipped. Tiyufta Rabbi Tiyufta, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Arza, Rabbi Yossi ben Naroi, Haviyasvei. They were sitting because Shasi Chamra. They were drinking wine. They were sitting and drinking wine. Asahu Kavra, showed up this individual, and Amrulei Te Ashkinon. He was the meltzar, he was the waiter, and he said, "Go ahead, give us the drink. Go ahead, give us the drink." Lebasa de Roma Lekasa. After he came and he threw it in their cups. Igloi milsa David kichavimhu. Chad asa afilu bahana. One said the wine is asa even bahana. Chad shari afilu b'shtia. Talk about going from Sumek to Kenny. We say Kenny from Ek to Sumek, right? Like Dennis Eckersley, right? From Ek to Sumek, right? Anyway. So one end of the spectrum to the other. On one hand, you're saying it's asa bahana. On the other hand, you're saying that it's muta b'shtia. So again, what's the case? They didn't realize this guy was a guy, and he told them to pour him the wine. Now, what exactly where the pouring took place is the shaila is really the shaila over here. Amr B'Shua ben Levi, Manda asa, the one who says it's asa, Shapir asa. You know what? No problem. He said very good. Manda Shari, the one that said it's muta, Shapir Shari. In other words, I can bring around each one, both. Give me enough money, and I'll find you a hatter, right? Each one goes. You go from both places. Manda asa on the days, the one that asks, Meima Oma. What does the guy say to himself? Solka daita drabanan kihani shichra kashasi. It seems beer was a low life drink. It wasn't for chashva guys. The chashva guy drank wine. Who drinks beer? You got to go to a ball game to see who drinks beer, right? So this guy said, you know what? There's no way they're drinking wine. These are chashva rabbanim. So what are they drinking? Wine. So as soon as he knew it was wine, what did he do? And he went ahead and he was menasach it Avodah Zorah. Therefore, it's asabana. Man shari, and the one who says it's mutter, shap shari, right? What's the svara? Meima Omar, the guy says to himself, the waiter, Sal Kedaitich Rabbanon Kihani, Chamra Kashasi, Va'amalei Lididi, Te Ashkinon. Now, Goyim know that Jews are not drinking from Goyish wine, right? So how in the world could he go ahead and tell us to go ahead and give us what to drink? Ella must be, it's not wine. You have a psychological reason over here. In other words, one hand, he's looking, one side said, B'Shua ben Levi, you look at the mensch, and then therefore it's going to be asa. The other side, you look at the beverage. There's no way, guy, there's chash rabbanim telling us to serve wine. Guys, what's the first reaction when you see a guy around wine? It's a natural, you go like, you have the guy in the house. It's just a natural thing that you know that stay away from that, right? So he said, there's no way. So therefore what? Elavadai shichrahave kashasi v'leinaske. And therefore, it's what? It is beer, and therefore he didn't bother being menasachit. Fred the Gemara Kachazi, what are you talking about? He's not menasachit. He could see that it's not beer. He could see it's wine. He says, it's nighttime. Fred the Gemara Kamarachle, that you could smell the nice smell of wine, right? It has good smell, the aroma, the scent. Says the Gemara Bechadata, it was new wine. It doesn't have such a good scent. Fred the Gemara Kanoga Be Benatla. Now the half a meaning of this fellas, we know how he's pouring it. He had like a ladle and he was taking it out of the bucket. So l'chayra, he's touching it with the natla. So therefore, it should be right touching it shalei b'kavana. Guys, we had the Gemara earlier. Remember with the lulav, when the lulav touched the wine, the lulav touched the wine. So the same thing over here. You have the ladle touching the wine. It's maga of should aser. So it's not speaking where he took the ladle and touched it. It's speaking where he poured it directly from the bucket. So since he poured it directly from the bucket, you never had maga of a guy. Poured it directly. Fred the Gemara of Now this is the reason for its heta. The reason why pouring it from a bucket, we're not asa, right? Even though he doesn't know it's wine, because the koicha of a goy, as long as shlei b'kavana, is not a problem. The Rabbanan were not goyza to that extent. Okay, so we have this incident where a guy is pouring wine for Rabbi Yossi ben Naroi and Rabbi Yochanan ben Arza, two people, right? Two good. And we're concluding that it wasn't touched shaloi b'kavana, because shaloi b'kavana, where you took the bucket and you put it directly in the wine, he took the barrel and he poured it. It's koichoi shaloi b'kavana is not a problem because they weren't goyzes. They weren't goyzes on koichoi shaloi b'kavana. So that's the reason they matted it. Nu shaila. Boy mini Rav Asi Rabbi Yochanan. Yayin shem samchay oived kichavim. Yayin that a goy diluted. We're familiar with the diluted wine. They used to have 3 parts water to 1 part wine. That was the mazig of Rava, because the wine was very powerful, and then he would go ahead and put water in. If you put a little water in some wine, you might go from hagaf into a shahakal. You got to be careful, right? But anyway, this is what they did. It retained its flavor and its strength. And so here's the shaila: if he's going ahead and pouring in, right? What's the din? Says Rashi, shemaschai. He's going ahead and diluting it. He's putting water in to make it proper for drink. When they put him in the cup, they put then water in. What's the din of yain of Yisrael? That right. So now one says asa, right? One says asa. Why would it be asa? Okay, Rashi says, "Afagavli noga," even though the goy did not go ahead and touch it, because Rabbanan b'koichoi la'asrei b'shtia mishum harchokas avera. Amahu vaday le'mitzah li'odif minagia al yedei davar acher shalei b'kavana. Okay, he did noga b'livid b'chamra b'shaya Rav b'hana. Okay, so Rav in that case where it was nogea al yedei davar acher, Rav permitted it. So too over here, going ahead, taking water and pouring it in is not worse than that. However, we don't want goyim hanging around wine. We don't want goyim hanging around wine. So obviously, if he's going to go ahead and be diluting the wine, that's his job. We tell a nazir, stay away from the vineyard. Stay away. We have a meister guys with Shimshon, guys, by the way. Shaftim. Shimshon's walking with his parents. They're going to the shidduch, right? Not the lila. It's the first girl. They get to a vineyard, and his parents walk through. He's walking around, and he's attacked by a lion, and the Navi tells us that he ripped the lion apart like nothing. So the shadow was, where was his parents? The answer was Shimshon lech lech. He had to walk around the vineyard. He wasn't able to walk through the vineyard. The parents could walk through the vineyard, but lech lech he had to stay away the same way. It's a nice little deher. He had to stay away from the vineyard. So geshmak. It says the Gemara. So first of all, so what's the halacha? Amalei ve'ema mazgai. So Rav Asi said to Rabbi Yochanan, misachai with a samich, and Rabbi Yochanan said retvi ayid. Said mizagai. Don't speak a funny way. So Amalei. So Rav Asi told Rabbi Yochanan, anak kidesivna kamina. I was going according to the pasuk in Mishlei. Zag Mishlei tavcha tivcha, that she went ahead and she slaughtered the meat and maschayena and diluted the wine. So you see mascha with a samich. So Amalei. So Rabbi Yochanan told him, Lashon Torah la'atzman, v'lashon chacham la'atzman. Guys, you're learning Masechta Beitza or Masechta Beya. You're learning Masechta Beya, right? Beitza. We have a certain way of pronouncing things. You learn Masechta Beya, not let me say Beitza. And so over here also, he's talking Rabbi Yochanan Rav Asi, because good the Torah says Mascha, Misachai, but guess what? Red be alamdin. Anyway, that was a little side point, right? An obscure point that'll make it into somewhere. Amalei Asa. He said it's Asa. Mishum lech lech amina nazir. We told the nazir go around. Sacha the karma le sikrav. Go and don't go around the karma le sikrav. So in other words, that's what Rashi, we went ahead and we foreshadowed you the Rashi. What did Rashi tell us? There's really no reason to asr it. The koichai is not going to go ahead and asr it. What's going to asr it? Bahano. It's going to asr bahano is what is the, you shouldn't be around it. So that's it. Rav Yomi ikla l'savsa. He came to his place. Savsa, chosach chamra demazger v'kechovim. He's right. V'ishtei Yisrael minei, and a Jew had drunk from it. V'yasalahu. Mishum lech lech amin nazira. Sacha sacha l'karmel sikrav. So therefore, Rav Yirmiyah, he asked it. It manami, am Rabbi Yochanan, v'milo am Rav Asi, am Rabbi Yochanan, yayin shemaz goev kechavim masa mishum lech lech amin nazira. Sacha sacha l'karmel sikrav. Ve'shlokish ikla l'batzra. Ve'shlokish. I think we'll stop over here because it goes down halfway down the Amid over there.